Welcome. You are listening to the Be a Better Being podcast hosted by Michelle Zellner and Sasha Berscheid. Michelle and Sasha are here to give you information and inspiration to help you live your healthiest, happiest lives. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the show.
Greetings, Better Beings. I just wanted to come on real quick and tell you about an awesome opportunity I have coming up. I am offering my You Revolution program starting March 5th to anybody in the whole wide world. This is going to be a fundraiser for me. I am on the executive leadership team for the Denver Heart Walk for 2024. And as part of a fundraising effort, I am giving you a phenomenal deal to take part in this opportunity. All you have to do is make a $500 contribution to my Heart Walk fundraiser, and that gets you into this 12-week program. If you would have to pay for this program on your own, trust me, it would be way more than that. There are weekly online classes. There's going to be one-on-one coaching. If you are in the Denver area, I'm going to try to have some in-person meetups as well. There's going to be a Facebook group for constant interaction and celebration. And if you're in the area, or if you want to come to the area, it's all going to celebrate at the culmination with the Denver Heart Walk June 1st at Sloan's Lake. If you are interested in this, do not delay. Reach out to me. I will get you all the information, answer all the questions. But the You Revolution, 12 weeks to literally help you evolve into the healthiest, happiest human that you want to be. Reach out, check the show notes. All the links are going to be there for you to access. And of course, you can always message me directly. Thanks, everybody. Greetings. Thank you for tuning in to the Be a Better Being podcast. I'm Michelle Zellner, your host, joined today by my beautiful pod partner, Sasha. How are you, darling?
Hey, everyone. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm excited for you to be here as well because I've mentioned to you this person we're about to chat with before. She was a very critical piece of my own healing journey, and I'm excited to have Fran Gallaher on the show with us today. Hello, Fran.
Hello, Michelle. Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure meeting you, Sasha.
Well, it is Heart Month, and, we talk a lot about heart health. I do all that. We also talk about healing journeys, and I think healing our hearts is probably one of the hardest things to do. Take any other body part, we can wrap it up, bandage it up, set it in a cast, put some cream on it. It'll be fine. But oh boy, healing the heart. And if you're around long enough, and if you are lucky enough to have love, you're going to have your heart broken. There's no way around it. So, Fran, before we dive into a little bit about how you and I know each other and how you helped me, give us the backstory on you and how you came to do what you do.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I'll try to make it short, but it's kind of a long journey. So when I was a child, I believe my mother was depressed, and she put me and my next youngest brother, and I'm one of 7, but my next youngest brother and she put in a playroom for most of the time. And I was not allowed to ask her questions or talk with her very much. So on the one hand, that was a great deal of neglect. But on the other hand, I saw non-physical beings. There was a knight in armor who stood outside my bedroom door, and there were beings, the faces in the wallpaper, who spoke to me, and I could see into these different worlds. I still don't know what all I was able to perceive, but there was no one to tell me that those things weren't real because my mother wasn't in communication with me. So fast forward, I ended up in my mid-20s absolutely bereft because I had thought that science and logic was the answer and not having emotions was going to protect me. And in fact, that doesn't work. Let me just tell you, I tried my hardest. So I'm still a fan of science and logic, and I'm one of the few intuitives who is also capable of logic. But I ended up returning to the study of metaphysics. I had had a mentor from age 13, and she had gotten me involved in metaphysics, which I resisted all of that. But I got back into it, and I discovered that healing my heart and developing my intuition was the recipe for wholeness, because you can't develop your intuition without learning to respect and be in touch with yourself. So now I have arrived at adulthood, way into adulthood, as a matter of fact, and I'm finally figuring it out, Michelle.
Well, I think you figured out a long time ago, because I was just thinking back. I mean, we're recording this February 2024. I think I saw you in like 2013 or 14.
Wow.
I know
That's wonderful to remember.
it's
Yes,
wild, yeah, because it was well before I wrote my book, and I wrote that in 2018, and you're in my book because
I know.
you were such a big piece of the leap forward. I'll tell you, and you already know this, I was not happy. I was not happy with the things you had suggested I do. I was very resistant. I was a little like, Fran, whatever, Fran. I don't need to do that. That's stupid. But I did it because I was at that point where clearly what I was doing wasn't getting me where I needed to be. So just for backstory for the listeners, if you've listened to anything about me or read my book, you know that my marriage was wonderful and then it was awful. And it was very quick. We're not in each other's lives in the grand scheme of it for very many years, but the time spent in the years we were together was incredibly tight and solid and impactful. And when he came home one day and said, "I love you, you're the best thing ever to happen to me. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, and I need to leave you." I was like, what? I mean, my reaction was a little different than that, but yeah. So that's kind of when my world blew up. Now, it had blown up about 10 years prior to that, with my first real relationship ending with a, "Hey, I'm so-and-so, and your fiance's child will be turning 2 next month, and I just thought you should know that before I married him." So that was 10 years prior to this situation. And, I'd done a lot of healing through that one, and I thought, I'm good. I figured it out. I've learned to forgive and let go and move on and appreciate all the good that was. And little did I know that that was like JV squad compared to what was coming my way. And so having kind of put the head down and like, okay, fine, this is life. It is what it is. I'm fine. Move on. You take a picture of my life prior to knowing my husband, and you take a picture of my life the day after he said this. Really, nothing's different. I'm still me. I still have my job. I still have my home. If you didn't know me, you wouldn't have really known anything went on in the middle, except that a whole bunch went on in the middle. And so as you're trying to get through and realizing that your heart has just been shattered and your life has been shattered, and the life that you thought you had feels like 100% a lie, because these two things just cannot possibly be both happening at the same time. My defense mechanism was to just discover or convince myself that the 4 years with him was all a lie. Nothing he said was true. Nothing was real, right? You can't have loved me and think I'm the best thing ever and then tell me you're going to leave me and then do all these things that you did following that. Like, not the same. And that got me through, right? That is survival mode. I needed to continue to work and pay my bills and figure life out. And then at some point, survival is no longer necessary. And now it's really just holding you back. And it was during that time when I realized I'm hitting a ceiling. All the things that I've done, great, got me this far. But if I want to actually get back to living, I'm going to have to figure some things out. And my dear friend Beth, who was a client at the time, I don't know how she discovered you actually, but she was like, "Hey, come to this workshop with me." She was trying to sort through some things as well. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure, why not? And that's when I first met you. And then I thought, I'm really curious to know more. And so that's how we became connected. And little did I know that it was going to be probably the most important connection at that time in my life that I would have. I know I get teary-eyed.
Wow. I'm so touched and grateful to hear that I've had that kind of impact. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know you've had that impact on many, many people. So let's describe a little bit about what it means to be an intuitive coach, an intuitive healer, and then we'll maybe talk a little bit about, I'll tell the story about my experience with you because it is still so 100% vivid to this day.
Oh. Intuition is the aha moment. If you're driving away from your house and you go, got my phone, put the dog in the kennel, turn the lights off or on, that's logic. If you drive away from your house and you go, I forgot my phone, that's intuition. So intuition is just one of the ways that your mind and your brain work. So if you develop your intuition, it means that you can read situations. You can pick up information from people, from various situations, and it can go all the way from just ordinary intuition, which is you're walking down the street and you feel like you should cross over to the other side. And by the way, intuition is not rational. You will not know why you needed to cross to the other side of the street until Wile E. Coyote drops an anvil on the spot where you were before. So intuition augments our lives. It augments our reasoning. And if we develop it further, again, we can pick up information that might not be available otherwise. So for instance, I read you. I read your energy. I read what your soul and your guides are telling you. I often describe it as if you've ever had your mail held at the post office and you go back in for your mail, you have to ask a clerk to get your mail and give it to you. I'm just a clerk. And I'm going to pick up the information that you've probably heard as whispers. And like you, Michelle, you might have resisted it. We all do. We all think we have it all figured out. And knowing that we don't know is really the first step in the spiritual journey. And then coming to me or someone like me, because there are plenty of us out there now, we can read your situation for you.
I love that description. And Sasha, I know you've had a lot of experience with this, right? We just had Astara on our show. And I think, she did similar for you, what Fran did for me, probably in very different ways, but still it's getting down into that soul. And I mean, I am a very intuitive person. I've known that for a long time. Even the day I sat across at my first date with who was going to be my husband, I pretty much knew his life story without even knowing him. And I was validated in that over the course of time by him sharing his life story with me. And I'm like, yep. And so it is something we all have. And yet I think when you get to a place where you have been destroyed and shattered, all of that confidence and that belief that you had is now in question. Right. So explain how love specifically can maybe cloud our judgment and intuition about things.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, you've used the word shattered twice, and I just want your listeners to know that the very first healer I ever went to, she took a look at me energetically and she said, Fran, your heart looks like it was in a car accident. It is shattered. So I want your listeners to know that you and I, Michelle, and I don't know, maybe you have also, Sasha, come back from shattering experiences. And I can bless my own experience. And when we process our experience, it just becomes our history. So it's so interesting that you could pick up the history of your future husband, because somehow that history must have been processed to the point that it was available. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
And you may have processed your own experience so that you wouldn't be shattered because you're highly empathic. And if you hadn't processed some of your own experience to that point, I think you could have been shattered by his history. So then regarding love, I think love is something separate from desire and romance. So actual love is the most powerful force in the universe. And I think that we have to be really careful, because if it's safe to say that there is an egoic desire that might be intertwined with love, and it would be that egoic desire that would be the problem, that we might get resistant to the reality that we're ignoring, perhaps. And, I just want to put in a positive plug for the ego. The ego is the adult functional self. So there's nothing wrong with the ego. It's just that the ego is based on learned experience. So the ego can't perceive something new. So in love, I'm going to say that when we really stand in the power of love and in our own clarity and strength, we're going to see things clearly, and we may have to walk away from egoic desire and romantic love, or embrace it and go after it.
Yeah, Sasha, chime in here, because I know you have a lot of just your own experience with these things.
Yeah, no, I'm loving listening to all of this, because it does remind me of all of my work that I did with Astara. I just think it's beautiful how the universe and time will send you exactly who you need to help guide you out of, for you and for me, it was our shatteredness, right? So I just think it's very beautiful that you have your own Astara.
Well, and everybody needs one, I tell you, because I'm a very strong person. I'm very logical. I also understand emotions and all of that. And I think to Fran's point, when you go through something that makes zero sense, it makes no sense, right? The ego gets in the way. Like, okay, well, you can't possibly have loved me, because if you loved me, you wouldn't do this, right? And so the ego of resisting what it was and denying all of what was really what was preventing me from fully healing and accepting. And I remember very clearly, Fran, one of the first things you said to me when I explained all this and how could these two things be the same, you said, well, Michelle, you can have a hole in your head and walk around and say, I don't have a hole in my head. I'm fine. I don't have a hole in my head. I'm look at me. I'm walking around. I'm thinking. I'm talking. I'm doing. Except that you have a hole in your head, you do. I can see it. And I was like, huh, okay. Because I was like, I'm fine. Whatever. These last 4 years, they didn't matter. Clearly, they weren't real. So let's just move on. So I was denying all the things that were, because that was easier than accepting what was, and now also accepting that these two realities can actually coexist. So I know that was kind of like a, oh, well, you kind of got me there. Okay. moment. And then what you did, you took me on this, well, you had me do a couple of things. One, which I really was salty about, you wanted me to write every day, write something positive about him and our life together every day. I was like, nope, not going to do it. And eventually I did it. I actually still have it. I just looked at it the other day knowing we were chatting. And it's a way to help you recognize that those things were real. The other thing you had me do was just, list any of the really great moments and times, and just as they came to mind, just sit with them and be with them and embrace them, to again reinforce that all of that was real. And as you do an activity like that, it is hard when you're in the midst. And it wasn't, this was a little bit after, right? Still through the processing of it, when you think you've gotten over something, but clearly you haven't, because you're hitting roadblocks. I think sometimes we just want to forget, right? Let's just move on and forget. And yet, if you haven't really dealt with all of that, moving on and forgetting it, that isn't going to happen at all. We can pretend it's happened, but it really doesn't happen. So going back and revisiting the good things, because for me, that was the thing. I was in denial of the good things, right? I decided all of that was a lie. Every single thing he did, said, all the good was all a lie. And when you can see it all laid out, acknowledge the good, and then understand that he did the best he could, and the life he was living, right? And yes, you probably were and maybe still are the most important thing in his life ever. And this is what he thinks he needs to do. So having somebody just kind of walk you through these two things and face your own reality, embrace your reality instead of being pissed off that it no longer is, be really grateful and amazed at what you had, because it's pretty rare what you had. And that was another perspective I didn't really want to take, because I was still in mode, right? And yet, after seeing you and going through my own process, that absolutely 100% is the perspective I have. So are those kind of typical activities and exercises you have people do when you're trying to get somebody aligned and able to heal and move forward? Or what are some other ways that you like that?
I don't know that I have too many things that are typical. One of the things that I believe we did, and you sound like you remember so many things accurately. Did I take you to the Temple of the Soul?
You sure did. I was just going to talk about the Temple of my soul. Yes, you did.
Well, why don't you tell your experience, and then I'll explain where that came from. And I do often take people to the Temple of the Soul, so that is a little more typical.
Yeah. So I'm, sitting in your office in a chair, and you're just kind of getting me into a very, mindful, quiet, peaceful place. And you're going to take me on this journey and just walk with me along to the temple of my soul. And you just asked me to be open and just notice anybody who's on that journey with you. And then at some point, as you're talking and we're kind of going through, and now we're there, and now we're at the gates, and the doors are opening, and there's somebody guiding you in to go sit down at your temple. And anybody that comes to see you, just have a conversation with them. There might be somebody that comes to, ask for your forgiveness, or someone that you recognize was really important that you never really maybe acknowledge that out loud, just whoever comes. And I still, I can feel it right now as we're going through it, my body felt gigantic. It felt like, who's the one Violet in Willy Wonka, right? Where she just gets big, 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 big. That's what I felt like my body, I felt like my hands were gargantuan. Everything was just giant. The person who was at my gate was Rosemary Brown. She was a client of mine. She, at that point, and gosh, even still today, she is the only person in my life who's passed away that is close to me. And she was pivotal during all of this, from when I met him to when it all crashed. And she often told me some truths that I didn't want to hear either, but I appreciated her sharing those truths with me. And she was my angel who guided me to this, my temple, my throne that I was going to get to go sit in. And it made 100% sense why it was her. And then a couple of people appeared. One was my grandpa. There were some things there that were not cool that I held a lot of resentment for. One of them was my gymnastics coach, and then it was Travis. And you said, if he doesn't appear naturally, you need to call him. You need to make sure you call him to come to you. And he appeared naturally. And, I just remember at that point, me just sobbing uncontrollably. And it was the acknowledgement that you did love me. And I'm grateful for that, and grateful for that time that we had. And whatever has happened since, that's your story. And I'm glad that I was part of it for what I was. And so then you walked me back through it. And I have to say, I was pissed. When I was done with that experience, I was pissed. I was like, God damn it. No, I don't want to be grateful. I don't want to forgive him. I don't want to recognize that this was all great, because then you compare it to if it was so great, why doesn't it get to continue? Right. But I was pissed for just a little bit of time. I mean, that initial piece of me, right, was like, God darn it, Fran, you were right. Right. Again, the ego getting in the way. But that was that initial experience. It also came, helped me process some things with my grandpa and my coach, and just a lot of things. It helped to make sense and fill in some puzzle pieces that were, I never really connected the dots with before. So that's what I remember.
Wow. Wow. So you're certainly filling in some of the details of that exchange. I kind of sound like a little bit of a hard ass.
Well,
I
you are, and you have to be. You have to be when you're dealing with somebody like me who's very strong-willed and very like, let's just move on and get over it. I don't have time for this. Like, we're good, right? You have to be. So.
the way that this visualization came to be for me was that I've been so fortunate. I've had many mentors and teachers. And one of my mentors and teachers was the late Dr. Leland Kaiser. And he was very, very wise. He was an amazing man. And I was troubled by some question. I don't have the memory you have, Michelle, because I have no idea what the question or the answer ended up being. But I was really troubled by this. And one night I awoke from a dream in which I had gone to the temple of my soul, and everything was suffused with a beautiful sort of a golden yellow light. And Lee, we called Dr. Leland Kaiser Lee, he was sitting at a table and I was sitting in front of him, and he answered this question that was troubling me. And it liberated me, whatever the question or the answer happened to be. And then not long after that, I had a client come to me, and she gave me permission to tell this story. I won't identify her, but she was now I believe I can't remember the term, but it's some sort of internet shaming that she experienced, where she broke up with a man and he did everything he could to humiliate her. He hacked her email and took an email that was a romantic and sexual exchange with a new lover, and he sent that to all of her contacts. And he had photocopied entries from her journal, and each entry that was about a person, he sent to that person. And because he used the US mail, the FBI got involved because she went to the police, and she went on. And I said, well, wait a minute, what happened? What did ended up happening? And she said, oh, I just went to the temple of my soul, and I said, why are you doing this to me? And he said, I don't know. And she said, well, then stop doing it to me. And he stopped doing it to her. So at the time, I had a CEO as a client who ran a large healthcare company. And I started taking him to the Temple of the Soul to deal with his executive team and those people who he was grooming to become members of his executive team, and for him to be able to tell them things that he couldn't tell in real life. So let's say they needed to up their game in their appearance or how they dressed or whatever. And so he we used the Temple of the Soul a lot. And he used it in very strategic ways to enhance his conversations with various people. So since then, I use it for people who might need closure, or again, might need to say something to someone that they actually cannot say in real life, but they can get the message across. I also use it for people to go to a little outlier of their Akashic records, and they can read a book about what they should be doing or see a movie about what they should be doing. The Temple of the Soul is a place I do often take people.
Well, it's a fantastic place to visit and fascinating experience. If you've never done it, I highly encourage people to go on a journey like this. Sasha, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just wondering about your own experience, Fran, and your healing with your mother. Did that come to fruition in like the physical? Like, were you able to have a conversation with her, or did you do all your healing internally?
Internally, and then later with the help of my mother. So just so you and your listeners know, my mother was very, very destructive toward me. She began giving me little blue pills when I was 8. And when I got old enough, I would hang out at the library, and I was 13, and I came across this cool book called The Physician's Desk Reference. And it's also called the PDR. And I looked up those little blue pills and discovered that my mother was giving me Valium. And I think she may have had a little bit of an issue herself with Valium. And then when I went to her when I had severe menstrual cramps, she didn't say anything, but she came home from the store with a bottle of cheap wine and said, "Go to bed and drink this." So I did. And I discovered that you can have menstrual cramps, be in terrible pain, and be drunk. And it's all the drunk doesn't really help. I don't know what they're doing in those cowboy movies. And maybe I needed whiskey, but I did not need either of those things at age 13. So as I got older, I ended up having conversations with her in a meditative state. And some of them got ugly, I have to admit, but it became necessary for me to express my anger. And then 2 years ago this spring, I was in my room in despair because I was having a great deal of difficulty in my life. And my mother came to me, and she just kept saying, and she was in a non-physical form. My mother was already passed away for many years. And she came to me and she said, "I didn't know. I didn't know." And she just kept saying, "I didn't know." And what she meant was she had no idea that what she had done, the way she had treated me would be so damaging to me. And then I had a networking appointment, just a networking one-on-one with a woman who is a financial advisor. And she said in the meeting, she said, "You know, Fran, I don't tell my clients this, and I don't tell anyone this, but I'm telling you this." She said, "I have the same abilities you have, and your mom is here right now, and she is asking you to forgive her." And I hadn't told this woman about my mom saying, "I didn't know, I didn't know." So I forgave her. And since then, I believe my mother has been part of the army of guides and angels who are steering me in the direction that I need to go to be successful. May I just announce that over the weekend, I had a TikTok video go viral. And this morning, it's at 184.5 thousand views.
That is incredible. And I love that because I know how pivotal you were in my own journey. And, you touched on forgiveness. I think acceptance was huge for me, like accepting the reality of what it was. And, for a lot of people, we're going to deny the reality that things were bad. For me, it was denying the reality that things were good, right? Especially because everybody's in your ear, like, "Oh, he was such a this and he was such a that. And he's a horrible person. How could he do that?" And I was like, you're right. All of that was a lie. And yet I knew in my heart and soul that it wasn't a lie. I knew it was real because I was there. So accepting was such a big piece of it. And then the forgiveness part. And I think so many people struggle with forgiveness, as did I, because it feels like it is condoning or dismissing the yucky, right? Whatever she did. And, you were probably at that point in my life, maybe the first time it was said to me specifically that forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for me. And of course, that didn't make any kind of sense. I was like, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Well, of course, it's 100% true. And yet it's still really difficult to do. And it was, for all the people that were in my Temple of Soul meditation visualization, it was some level of forgiveness that I needed to do. And then you actually had me do a writing exercise about forgiving myself, forgiving whoever, right? And what does that forgiveness look like? What am I forgiving for? And then how do I feel once I have acknowledged that I forgive? And so do you find that forgiveness is just a huge piece of it that, number one, is required to really come back to a whole place, but also that maybe is one of the hardest things for people to do?
I think you're making a true statement. I do believe that sometimes we have to deal with our anger and our hatred before we get to forgiveness. And just so you and your listeners know, people get to feel anger and hatred. And everybody's afraid of hatred. Hatred is a natural emotion. It's not the emotion that's the problem. It's acting on it. So once we learn not necessarily to act on our emotions, but to ground them in our physical body by feeling them until they dissipate, that's not easy to do. And if somebody's standing on your foot, you might not want to stand there grounding your emotion into your physical body and wait till it dissipates. You say, get off my foot. But there's so many aspects to it, Michelle. You were a special case, I believe, because you are, as you mentioned, so strong-willed that forgiveness was like a key in a lock for you, I think. And for other people, there might be a different key in a different lock. So, and I think sometimes we forget that forgiveness, again, as you said, is not condoning or validating the justification of behind what they were doing, what they were feeling. What I have learned to do is look at, why did this soul, my own soul, call this person or this situation to me? What do I need to graduate from? So, I just recently had a situation where someone, I believe, mistreated me, and I used it to unlock a giant block that I've had that I didn't know I had. And I won't go on and on about it right now. But if I look at things that my soul brought this to me, to graduate from something or someone. And graduating means you no longer have any reaction to the person or the situation. And when I have graduated, usually the situation is gone like that. And if you want me to go into that, I can. But I'm also getting something, and I wondered if I could share an intuitive insight I'm getting for you, Michelle.
Oh, yes, please.
It may not be new to you, but I feel like your husband, then husband, I think he may have been guided from higher guidance, that the only way you would ever be able to be the star you have become was for him to let you go. And I'm also feeling, I don't know what's happened to him and if he pursued his path, but I feel like he sensed the star you needed to be, and that you and that him and that star were not a couple that you in a nascent form could be. Does that make sense?
I mean, it's like you've lived my life the last 10 years. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yes. We'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
But if it would be helpful, I'd love to also explain that what I believe is, when we allow our emotions to arise, peak, and dissipate, we're going to begin getting in touch with an energy beneath the emotions. So the Sufis sort of mapped these emotions and the energies beneath them, and they have assigned colors to them. And the only reason I teach it is because I've had direct experience with it. It's very real to me. But when anger arises, peaks, and dissipates, it leaves behind strength and clarity. When hatred arises and peaks and dissipates, it leaves behind power. Anger is hot. Hatred is cold. So the cold shoulder is our colloquial description of hatred. And so once we start to allow our emotions to run clear, and we're not caught in a narrative, poor me, or they're a bunch of jerks, or whatever. I mean, not that I don't do that, but of course I feel that sometimes. But once we're not as caught in the narrative, but that we feel the physical sensations of our emotions, which is what I'm calling grounding your emotion in your physical experience, then the intuition can run on those circuits. And once the intuition is running, then guidance can run on top of that. And we are more and more in touch. We're more aware of our own soul and our soul's purpose. and we're in alignment with our purpose.
And it's such hard work, right? And that's why so many of us don't do it, or we resist it, because we don't have time, we don't have the desire, we don't have the energy. And yet I know it because I lived it. It's hard now or harder later. And this is one of the hardest things I ever did, was come and sit in your office. And yet I can't imagine how much harder my life would have been had I not done that.
So I'm so glad to hear that, and so grateful that you were willing to work with me and take those steps.
Well, and I say that because anybody who knows me knows, or even knows like the previous version of me, I'm pretty much, like, let's just go move on. Like the thing with my first fiance, that was huge. Like here I am, 25, thinking I know my life. And then to have somebody tell me, oh yeah, our child is turning 1, like, okay. And I mean, I really did like overcome that, whatever, it wasn't meant to be. Yes, it hurt, this, that, and the other. It took me a while, obviously, to heal through it. But again, I think that like laid the foundation for being able to then handle the next thing. And yet it was to such a greater degree that you just do start to question everything. But I have long held the belief that if you don't own your emotions, they will own you later.
Ooh,
And
I didn't know that, Michelle.
I mean, pretending that you're not mad when you are, pretending that you don't hate someone or something when you do isn't helpful, because your human will always know the truth. And it will come out in some way, shape, or form. And so anybody who's listening to this, if you have struggled or still struggle with a hole in the heart, or it's shattered, or maybe there's just a couple of cracks or dents, figure out what it needs to heal so it can be whole again. Because I think it is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, is allowing your heart to fully heal. Because as long as there's a perpetual wound there, you can't possibly be the best version of you.
Yes, I agree with you. I do want to pick up something. You said something, Michelle, about pretending that you're not mad. I am an advocate for us having privacy until we're ready to express our emotion. It's not about pretending or denying, but it's about saying, I'll get back to you because right now I'm pretty lit up. So let's talk later. That is always fair. And I also want to tell people that you all can go to the temple of your soul on your own. It's much easier if I take you there or someone takes you there. And after I've taken you there once, you can go back on your own. But this is a free universe.
Well, I love it. Sasha, anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think the work that you do is very important. I think everyone should find a healer, just because we can't necessarily, quote unquote, explain it doesn't mean that it's not real, because it's so real. And this is definitely how you can take thousands of years of pain and suffering and emotions and say, it ends with me, and I'm going to do what it takes to look into my records and heal myself so that my children or the loved ones that are around me can also heal. So I'm very thankful that you took your time to be on the show with us, Fran. I do hope that, people do reach out to you. If this landed with them, I really suggest working with a healer, working with Fran. You will change, and it will be for the better because of it. You just have to be open-minded and open-hearted and realize that this is real and this does exist. And there's so much more than what the eye can see, what meets the eye. And the heart, it has an electro field that goes, wah, 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 all the way out. Everyone can feel you before you even enter the room. And so heal yourself so that when people do feel you, when you do enter the room, it doesn't cascade all this negativity or anxiousness or anything like that. But instead, when you enter a room, people feel your presence and they say, wow, I want what that person has. And what that is healing.
Oh, thank you. I love that. I do want to tell your listeners that I see people online. I work with people all around the world, and I do have a few in-person slots at different times in my life, depending, but mostly I work online.
Which is such a great thing, right? Because literally it opens the world up to you and you up to the world. And so, um, from the minute I started a podcast, I knew I needed to have you on. I'm glad we finally were able to make it happen. And again, just cannot ever even properly express how grateful I am that my friend Beth introduced me to you, and whoever could have imagined how badly I needed it and how empowering that journey was going to be for me. So thank you for all of that. Yes. And everybody else, you've been listening to all of this, and there's a lot here. And I know a lot of you are thinking, ugh, but yeah.
I do offer 30-minute complimentary coaching sessions. These are substantive coaching sessions. Of course, we're limited by 30 minutes, but you can get a taste of what I do, and I can get a feel for you and your beautiful soul.
Yes, everybody better take advantage of that. We're going to put all the notes in our show notes of how people can reach out to you.
Thank you.
So, Fran, thank you again for joining us today. And everybody, now you get to go and be a better being.
Thank you for listening to the Be a Better Being podcast. Michelle and Sasha hope that what you heard today inspires you to embrace this journey of life with an open mind, a kind heart, and a willingness to learn and evolve. If you enjoyed the content, please help spread their message by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a 5-star review. If you have a show topic idea or would like to be a guest, please visit betterbeings.net and fill out a contact form. Until next time, go and be a better being.